This is Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta, the Indian ambassador to the UK, the Indian High Commissioner, should I say, to the UK, was just prevented by Khalistanis, by Sikh radicals, from entering a Gurudwara in Britain where he was duly invited and where indeed the table had been laid by the Gurudwara committee members to welcome him. In fact, one person even tried to forcefully open the door of the Indian High Commissioner to the UK. What's really going on the Khalistani issue in the UK after all the fiasco that we've seen in Canada, and really what is going on broadly with radicalism in the UK and broadly in Europe? To discuss all of this and much more, I have an old friend of Global Order with me in the conversation today. Professor Gautam Sen joins me from London. Gautam Sen spent more than 3 decades teaching at the London School of Economics. He taught political economy to whole generations of students, and he's been a very keen watcher of these issues for a long time. I am absolutely delighted to welcome Dr. Sen onto this conversation. Thank you, Dr. Sen, for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me, Hindol.
I want to begin by asking you, what do you make of this latest incident where the Indian High Commissioner was prevented from, entering a Gurdwara where he had actually been duly invited, and the videos which all of us have seen showed that Gurdwara committee members were waiting to welcome him. The table had been laid out to welcome him, and yet he was prevented from entering the Gurdwara. In fact, one person even forcefully tried to open his car.
Well, the first thing I would like to mention is that there was a security lapse, which ought not to happen, because he could well have opened the door. And one doesn't know what would have happened after. This is the first thing. Secondly, it is difficult to monitor and stop one individual. There were actually probably 2 or 3 at most who suddenly show up. The Gurdwara committee is somewhat to blame for not anticipating this, though one of the committee members actually prevented the car door from being opened. Now, what this means in terms of a broader government policy change towards people who are basically British citizens who wish to wage war against India is something yet to be seen. There have been so many incidents, particularly attacks on the Indian mission in Aldwych, and I think India has been very tolerant, but that has worn thin. I don't think the situation in the UK is quite as serious as the situation in Canada, because although there are significant numbers of voters who belong to this radical dispensation connected to the Punjab, they are not numerous enough to make political parties unduly sensitive to their sentiments. There are individual members of parliament who are vulnerable, particularly in Southall, Hounslow, and other regions where these communities live in significant numbers. But the interesting thing over here, as I think in Canada, is actually a phenomenon which is not very surprising, but again noteworthy. It's possible for relatively small numbers of organized people to cow the rest of the community into acquiescence in what they're doing. To be very frank, my view of the Sikh community in England, and I have many Sikh friends, in fact, very dear friends, whose friendship I greatly value, because they are some of the most reliable friends you can have. When you need them, they are there, no questions asked. So that's the first thing. But there is an underlying issue which the government of India and governments over time have failed to address. One is actually they are still hurt about the invasion of the Golden Temple, which has never been adequately explained in detail as to why this came about. It has not been put out carefully. That's the first lapse on the side of all successive Indian governments. And the other thing is a much greater lapse, in my view, as an Indian. And as most Indians, we are, correctly deferential towards the Granth Sahib and the faith. It is in our lifeblood. Is what happened in 1984 largely went unpunished. And I keep telling my Sikh friends, I am as upset as you are that this happened, first of all. Secondly, people were not called to account in an adequate way. This will take time to heal. And I still think there is room for the governments of India reaching out. But I do believe people in general are becoming more aware of the significant attempts which have been made by the incumbent Modi government to make sure Sikhs feel included in the new India. And small things like making sure that the Guru Granth Sahib is available in public places, Indian missions, along with the Gita, is an important step. And certainly the Prime Minister has shown himself to be, in many ways, a deeply committed Sikh in some ways, that he really, has great reverence, not simply for their great military leaders, but for the originator and his incredibly important philosophical contribution to our sense of the self. Something which I share, and I'm sure, Hindol, you do, like all my thoughtful Hindu friends too, that this is not something outside us. This is entirely integral to us as human beings, Indians.
India had literally a Sikh prime minister for a decade. Don't you think that in many ways would have gone to assuage much of this doubt?
Having prominent Sikhs in public life, I think, is not cutting it enough. Not cutting it enough. The wounds are very deep, particularly in 1984 in the Golden Temple. People, I understand, how would you feel if our sacred places were assaulted? We would all carry that feeling of grave injustice and a wound. And that is what has happened, and I perfectly understand that. And the government of India and successive governments needed to play a much more proactive role in explaining. And the assault on the Golden Temple was as much an assault on place of worship for me. And for me, it was appalling. I understand because I've studied what happened. I understand why it was done, but still, it shakes me to remember that the Akal Takht in the end could not be protected. Imagine similar assault on Ram Mandir or one of our great places, we would be upset too. But you're talking about a very ghastly quarrel inside the family. So we have to resolve it amongst ourselves. And I think ordinary people have a great role to play. And I'm very glad to see most Hindus reach out as they should. And as I said, I have a Sikh family living down the road. They are the people I call when I'm in trouble, and they're at my door. Their children, the parents, So I mean, this is my family.
May I also ask you, in the Punjab, in India today, there's absolutely no demand for Khalistan, for instance, inside the Punjab in India. The Khalistan movement, such as it is today, is entirely fueled from outside Indian Punjab. In fact, even the maps that are circulated, one is appalled to see, and of course, one understands what is the devious reason for it, does not contain most of what was the Sikh empire of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. It does not have most of Pakistan, modern day Pakistan, which was certainly part of his empire, and also large parts of Afghanistan, which were part of his empire. It doesn't even contain Lahore, which was the capital of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's. It was the seat of Sikh power. It was the capital of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's empire. Instead, it has large chunks of northern India, including even Delhi and even parts of Gujarat. There's obviously a deviousness in this.
No, that's a giveaway. The fact that no area which is beyond the borders of India are depicted in these maps. And this is fueled by money and help from across our border. It's very clear. In Canada, elsewhere, these people are engaged in a very low-cost harassment of India. And they are doing it partly because they feel that India was the instigator of the creation of Bangladesh, and this is payback. And it's, mostly very low cost. It doesn't, they don't have to expend personnel. Very little money is required. Some of this money is also coming from China. But bear in mind, this entire discontent within India a very sensitive part of India, politically, militarily, is a source of leverage for people who want to make us bend to their will. These are
Let me ask you
the
there.
atmosphere, and it's the United States. I'm very sorry to say they are.
This is exactly the point. This issue is now, it has become part of the, should I say, the toolkit of containment strategy for rising India, isn't it?
Well, this is actually not new. It actually goes back to the early 20th century. There were two groups of people the British thought would be on their side. One was India's minority population, which they were. They did not support the campaign to reunite Bengal, etc. And of course, Sikhs, Pathans, and Gurkhas were the sword arm of British power. Of course, that was mightily destabilized by the Gandhar party in 1913. So the Sikhs were not with them, and Canadians have forgotten the history of what happened and the hanging of that young Sikh chap who killed their spy. I think his name was Tomlinson. This is wonderfully covered in a book by our mutual friend Sanjeev Sanyal, which I would urge everybody to read because it really has chapter and verse and beautifully written. Now, so this is leverage against India, and let's not forget, for forever, even from Nehru's time, the West did not like how India behaved. India has asserted its sovereignty and independence in a way which is not acceptable. If you look at what's happened in Europe over the Ukraine, I'm shocked, though I live here and I know this continent well. They have all shown themselves to be vassals of the United States. The punishment these economies have taken to participate in the war against Russia and Ukraine is incredible. It has destabilized the UK, Germany, other countries. These are vassals. India has declined to be a vassal. And this is an aspiration which they have never given up. They've always tried to install a friendly government. Of course, you can't invade India, that is not possible. But it would be possible maybe to have a more friendly government. But most Indian governments in the end didn't behave in a friendly way. Even during UPA 2, India told the United States on the question of sanctions to Iran that we will comply with United Nations Security Council resolutions on sanctions, but not your unilateral ones. Even in that period before Modi, India was still saying that, and that was considered a more friendly government. Now, maybe an even more friendly government could be installed in 2025. And I think the way this will be done is not to get an ideological shift, but to have divided government, which will be very vulnerable to pressure from within and outside. Because if there are 15, 20 parties wielding power in Delhi, they all have their individual vulnerabilities. And if you can just seize one party, and the one I'm afraid they will seize is DMK, they will then put pressure on, change the policy. And the one they really hate now is India buying discounted fuel from Russia. They're really upset about that because, if India did not buy oil, this would put some serious strain on Russian finances. India and China's purchases of Russian oil have surely aided Russia's financial predicament, on which they have really tightened the screws on a big scale at great cost to themselves. So people out there think India is not a country which behaves as it should. And they are going to keep trying. And the militants in the Punjab is one of them. But, if you think about it, and I believe the government is at fault for not articulating this map, which includes Rajasthan, Himachal, all of Haryana. Delhi, by the way, is included in the map.
Gujarat, large parts
And,
of Gujarat.
and a corridor through Gujarat to have access to the sea.
Yes.
Now, say for argument's sake, it was accepted. Okay. They're not even going to get all of the Punjab. They will just get something in proportion to the population because they want all the Hindus out, which is what they were doing during Minden Wallace time. So this little landlocked country will be a vassal of Pakistan, right? Their men will have to serve in the Pakistani armed forces. And Pakistan is not going to buy their wheat at the inflated prices that India does. So this is basically no go. They will be finished. absolutely finished.
And the interesting thing is that subsequent Punjab chief ministers have explained this. Amrinder Singh, for instance, one of the biggest and most strongest voices against this radicalism, explained exactly this to the common Punjabi and to the farmers. This is why in Indian Punjab there are no takers for this. Of course, Indian Punjab also saw what happened to their society when this terrorism spread in their society. But also the other point that you're making, since we're talking about Pakistan, some of this has also got fueled, Dr. Sen, because the Americans left Afghanistan, the Golden Crescent is back in action. And we know that cocaine cultivation in Afghanistan is again at an entirely different scale, and that cocaine is coming via Pakistan, via Indian Punjab, and going to the west, landing up in Canada and other parts of the west. And that money, parts of that money, is fueling this sort of radicalism in places like Canada, in the US and the UK.
Yeah, no. I mean, there are sources of funding. And again, I said it's not vast amounts of money. So this is why it's easily done. And I'm afraid in every community, you will find numbers of people who will do what you require for money. And you see what's also happening, which is a much more tricky problem. There are agents in political parties which will supply you with letters saying that you are politically vulnerable and you are in fear of your life and you will therefore get asylum in Canada. And in fact, they charge a fee, I believe, the fee varies from 2 to 8 lakh rupees. They arrive in Canada. Basically, they have nothing. They are penniless. They arrive. Key gurdwaras are used to house them, feed them, and socialize them, and brainwash them. And then they become part of this network. These are relatively young men who are quite naive and ignorant about the affairs of the world. They're very much in need of sustenance. And this is being organized. Believe you me, this is being organized from Pakistan and other adversaries of India that, make sure that this flow of individual into this nexus continues. Now, this is a difficult one for India to deal with, and unless the Canadians take decisive steps. Now, going to Canada, there are two central problems, which are reflected in the data on support for the three groups, the Conservatives, the Liberals, and the NDP, the National Democratic Party. People are excited in India because the Conservatives are now at 40% and the Liberals of Trudeau are at 30%. But the balance of power is held by the NDP. Whoever is in power will be vulnerable to NDP pressure. That is why Trudeau is not bothered. He is still 52% with the NDP in tow. So he's not bothered about losing 10% of his vote bank. So that is not a threat to him. His support may be going down. He becomes more dependent on Jagmeet Singh and NDP. So they have an internal problem. The other thing about the Nijjar killing, I would first like to state, and I think it is understood by anybody who has an understanding of these issues, that when it's denied by the government at the highest level, as it has been by India, then you accept that explanation. You see, the point you made is interesting, that Jagmeet Singh's photographs are surfaced with the radicals. But that is perfectly understandable. He is their public face, so he is not going to dirty his hands unduly. So he will not compromise himself. So he keeps his distance. But that doesn't say anything about his political loyalties, which are clearly with the separatists. Now, as for the Nijjar killing, the government of India at the highest level has denied any involvement. Now, when that happens, you have to accept that indeed that is true. I'm sure they've even investigated the possibility of a rogue element in the Indian establishment having instigated this. But let me assure you, India's security systems and communications are very robust. Even a rogue element is unlikely to be detected. So then the question arises, what is this all about, the Nijjar killing?
Part of it is gang war, with Ripu Daman Singh and all of that. All of that is also out in the press.
That's a secondary issue. That's a second. Let me talk about the primary situational context. Nijjar was an intelligence asset, almost certainly of the United States. A lot of these people, they just happen to be in Canada. Canada is a vassal state completely. So this guy was an asset. When he died, they told Trudeau Indian involvement, not because they knew, but because they thought it was possible. And this was a signal to India, just in case, do not kill any more assets. That is the bottom line. This controversy has been manufactured just in case India was involved to send a strong message. Look, this is the outcome of a huge furore and global outcry. He may well have been killed, gang warfare, but they don't yet know that because they haven't arrested anybody. But they were simply taking a prudential measure of creating this controversy just in case the Indians had been involved. I don't know if the Indians have capacity to do that. Possibly, I don't know. But the fact of the matter remains, they don't know who killed him. And I accept the word of the government at the highest level that we were not involved. And we know there's gang warfare in Vancouver and elsewhere. We know that. Pakistanis might have killed. What happens to their agents? They get uppity, demanding. They don't listen to you. And you just want to replace them with somebody more pliable, somebody who's less trouble. This man may have gotten too big for his boots, and he may have, as these militants often are, told them where to get off, and they got angry with him. So they bumped him off. It's entirely possible. I don't think we will ever know what happened unless they manage to arrest the killers. Then something else may be known. But even if they arrest the killers, having committed himself to an Indian culpability, they may not tell us the whole story. Because in 1985, when Air India's Caniksha went down, they subverted the trial. The Canadians subverted the trial. And that principal accused was on parole very quickly. The bombers had been sent from Pakistan and trained in the United States. They were trained in the United States. And they could not be brought to court because everything would have been revealed. The government of India is aware of this reality.
There was one leak which I found very interesting, where it noted that India had, at its highest levels of security establishment, told the Americans that, in fact, India hasn't taken action yet on Gautam Sen, who's the other really inflammatory character who acts as the lawyer for all these Khalistani radical groups and whose properties are now being taken over in the Punjab, because India knows that he's a CIA agent.
See, this merely reinforces the argument that they would not knowingly have killed another CIA agent. Now, Nichar was a CIA agent. I'm very sorry that it may be at several removes, but somebody was in touch. He was having regular interaction with the Canadian Secret Service. He was being told, your life is in danger. All of that is now in the public realm. So it is all murky, but I'm afraid nobody is clean in this business. And the Indian government has for a very long time been very patient. And actually what they have done so far is relatively modest. This question of taking away the OIC card should have happened years ago. They're doing it now systematically. I hope they have good cameras outside the Indian High Commission in London to film everybody who's present and make a judgment call. Seizure of property? Definitely. These people are waging war against India. They have claimed to have killed 2,200 policemen, one prime minister, one chief minister. They have claimed that. Today I read that's the claim has been made. So government of India was well within its rights to take these measures. They are relatively mild considering
Let's
the
not
challenge.
forget, having conducted the biggest airborne terror attack ever in Canadian history and the biggest airborne terror attack ever in world history before 9/11 were done by these guys.
Absolutely. You see, and the issue of no longer issuing visas actually is quite a serious matter. It comes as close as you can to breaking diplomatic relations because there's no interaction between the two countries. Basically, physical traffic is stopped. I understand the government of India is hastily now issuing OICs so ordinary people from the Punjab don't get affected because it doesn't impact OIC holders. So I think they're accelerating the process because many Canadian Punjabis, despite repeatedly being urged, did not take the OIC card, which is puzzling because it is such a convenient thing and relatively cheap. But they are now urging them to apply, and they will do it online. This is what the government of India will do. But they have laid down a marker. Enough is enough. Canada will be the biggest loser in the end. You see, in the long run, they will slowly lose Indian students going there. $5 billion income in student fees. That's quite a lot of money. And unfortunately, I don't think this matter will be fully resolved because of the dictates of Canadian domestic politics. They have hung themselves on their own petard. I'm now amused to hear some of them are demanding an independent separate state inside Canada, in
Yes,
Surrey.
I know. I tweeted about that saying, if Khalistan ever gets built, actually it will be built not far from Ottawa, and not in the Indian subcontinent. Yes, indeed. Um,
If the capital of Khalistan is Vancouver, all I say is don't demand a visa from us. I'd love to go and visit because I like going to Gurdwaras and eating their food.
I want to talk to you a little bit about uh, where we started from, this entire thing, radicalism coming to the UK. When I used to live in the UK, you'll remember our High Commission was attacked twice, fronted by these kind of radicals. Once the High Commissioner had to be, in a sense, had to be stealthily taken out of the High Commission because there were fears that there would be a bigger attack. And there was a confluence between Islamists and these Sikh radicals, the Khalistanis. And we saw that in the groups that led the attack on our High Commission twice. What's really going on in the UK on this?
Let me add what I said at the outset. These are all British citizens. So British citizens are launching assaults on the mission of a friendly country with which it wants to have a free trade treaty. Now, of course, the equation has changed. India is not a weak country, and India can retaliate and impose costs. So far, the Indian retaliation has been muted. For example, removing the extended security outside British High Commission. But on the whole, India does not like to do this. They actually are very proud of providing for security and the integrity of foreign missions. They don't want this to become kind of default setting. I think this is done very reluctantly. No matter what happens elsewhere, they want to be seen as somebody who upholds the Vienna Convention. And I think that's absolutely right. The ministry is very thoughtful. It's run by very intelligent people, various levels, our ambassadors, our secretaries for different areas. And of course, we have an extraordinarily capable external affairs minister, whom it is a pleasure to watch. But we, on the whole, don't want trouble. This is our instinct, don't want trouble. And that is right. Trouble is inconvenient for us as it is for other people. We would like these matters to resolve. I think the UK has woken up somewhat. And they don't have the domestic compulsions that the Canadians have of the NDP. Be assured the level of monitoring is extensive. So the only thing which is required is action, and under what legal precept. That is very important. You simply cannot arrest people. And you cannot radically change domestic laws to enable that. So there is a bit of a difficulty here. In the Canadian case, the bombers of 85 were all being monitored. They were seen purchasing bomb-making equipment. The Canadians were doing that. The US was doing that when they were in the United States. So even now they're all monitored, and monitoring is much easier now because electronic communications is intercepted very easily. So they know what's going on. They have been lax because they didn't think it was such a big deal. Now I think that the UK, they're worried that the Indians are not going to take it lying down. And we wait to see what action might follow because they know who is up to what. And the Gurdwaras are full of security agents. Virtually every Gurdwara has secret service people. Many of the leaders are their assets, which is also true of mosques. The security services are everywhere. And believe you me, I've had interaction with security service personally in a police station. These guys know what they're doing. These are serious people. It is the political will that is required. And now that the government of India has said that we will not accept, and also you cannot, terrorize the High Commission. On that Republic Day, sorry, Independence Day when it was attacked, you see, there were young children, women cowering because it was being showered with brickbats, tins, cans. So, you can't accept that in the middle of London on your mission. The third protest, after the Indian government read the Riot Act, was diverted by the Home Secretary to Trafalgar Square. It was not allowed to assemble in front of Aldwych. The Home Secretary does not have the authority to cancel a march in England. That would be subject to judicial review. But she has the power to divert the march, which is what she did. That was our Home Secretary Patel who did that. Now, there are various things they can do. And let's see what it is that they will do when we have our Republic Day on the 26th quite soon. We've had our independence relatively uneventful. But that wider change of psychology that India as a country to be manipulated and controlled still endures here. And therefore, we will not give up all the assets through which we can achieve this. So we will make sure that all our doctorates in Oxford, Cambridge are doing PhDs of caste. All of this carries on merrily. But India has wised up finally to what's going on. And we are slow, but we are moving in the right direction. We are hoping to change the narrative.
A bit about that. Essentially, many of us see it for what it is, and I want to discuss that a little bit with you. These sort of behavior, these are essentially containment strategies against a rising power, isn't it? I mean, India had a great G20. The communique that everybody told us will not come finally came. One must, in a sense, thank the Americans for being accommodative and, understanding our point of view and, in a sense, meeting us halfway to ensure that the communique happened. But very soon after that, this Trudeau business exploded. And for many of us, it seemed like, a version of containment strategies to say that, look, I mean, there are all these carrots, the stick also exists.
The key strategy actually is a very old one, as I've already mentioned, goes back more than 150 years, is to see how you can use India's divisions to influence India's domestic politics. That is the name of the game, that you incite and reinforce social fissures, many of which were created by these people in Tamil Nadu, in Bengal, in the Punjab. These were created by the British colonials. And the evidence is now there on YouTube. All of this is out there. Now, this is the same game. They want to portray Indian culture as basically a culture of caste division and nothing else. That is the fundamental perspective they have been promoting through their doctoral programs, their newspaper discussions, that India is a racist, culturally caste country. That is the underlying issue. And that may bear fruit if you get caste parties in Delhi in 2024. That, these are caste parties. There's Uttar Pradesh or Tamil Nadu. This is what will happen. So that is the basic strategy. And the fact that India has had a good run of late only makes it worse. There's a bit of irritation that, world is doing badly and India is doing relatively well, thanks to the policies adopted by our incumbent Modi government since 2014. And, even a critic of the Modi government will admit they have pulled off some spectacular successes. I won't go on about that because on the whole, I approve of what is happening. The three things, which, really make you sit up. One is the way they dealt with the banking crisis they inherited. Look at where they were. It was so bad, they couldn't even speak about it for fear of making it even worse. And the banks are now in the money, publishing huge profits. That's one. The second, big, complicated country with incredibly difficult terrain handled COVID in a way which is breathtaking. How do you reach all these people in all these far-flung places? The logistical achievement, makes me feel there is hope for India to do many other things. And not only did they do that, they pulled it off by refusing to import foreign drugs, which are now being shown to be very problematic. Two of the major drugs, one of which I have taken, is now being shown in clinical studies to be very problematic. So they didn't overpay for the drugs. They didn't import it from abroad. And they managed to do it domestically. And very clear why this happened. Spirit of delivery, forget about everything, is now infused in the government. And that comes from the top. That this is not just about policy and talk, but you have to deliver. And I believe our Prime Minister is somebody who makes sure people around him deliver. Now, this is something we've never had in India. The delivery has such priority. And this attention to detail, again, this is something the Prime Minister does. He is attentive to the small things. Excuse me, but I'm not a believing man, but I say this is a divine intervention. India has also done something else for the first time. Is that it has pulled out the stops of infrastructure across the board. The scale of the achievement, roads, ports, airports, universities, technical colleges, not all perfect. But my God, a very big start has been made, and we need another decade of this to turn the corner permanently. So all of this is unfamiliar to our friends and critics abroad, especially now that the world is doing badly. And the United States economic problems are very serious, insurmountably serious. The level of debt and the growth, same in the UK. The growth cannot service the debt. And now the United States is facing a devastating financial crisis. It's unfolding as we speak, with the yields rising and the threat of a collapse, just like the way it happened in England with Liz Truss, but for slightly different reasons. All of this now, in this situation, India is posting higher growth rates. IMF says 6.3, and then they say, no, it's 6.8. And then, because there's a lag in the impact of infrastructure development, the benefits of infrastructure development are in the future. So next year, India's growth will possibly rise even further. I don't know how much. And the economy is run at the technical level by some of the finest brains anywhere in the world. I have the great honor to know at least two of them very well, and I know of a third. And my God, these people know what they're doing. They're totally committed, totally incorruptible. So I feel India is in safe hands, and credit must go right to the top.
Let's talk a little bit about the crisis that you're defining and underlining for us, both in the United States and the UK. Apart from the debt crisis and apart from the financial crisis and lack of infrastructure, there's also a serious social crisis in Europe, in the UK, and the US, isn't it? And that crisis, of course, is with the hundreds and thousands of often illegal immigrants that are flooding into their borders. I noticed with a great horror that Sweden is having to pull out its army to contain gang wars on the streets of Malmo and Stockholm and other cities. Even as, of course, Europe gets the debate about how many immigrants are coming in through Lampedusa and other places grows ever more shrill in Europe. The same thing, of course, is happening in various ways in the UK and the US too.
There are two factors in this question of huge influx of people. One is the scale. Scale is unsustainable, even with the best will in the world. That's the first thing. And secondly, the people who are coming into Europe are culturally very different. So integrating them into society is a tall order. They are also very committed to the cultures they bring along with them. And they are sufficiently militant and united to insist. Now, what is happening is, you see, in the UK, I mean, particularly, the cost of looking after the migrants is now very, very high. These people who are coming and very unstoppably crossing the English Channel, and the French are not doing a great deal to stop them before they embark. So they've got this plan to send them out to Rwanda, which again is a very costly business. So this will not wash. This will not address the problem. They actually caught, between a rock and a hard place. Very hard to stop the people coming in, very hard to integrate. And the biggest city, second biggest city in England, which is basically a city dominated by minorities, has just gone bankrupt. Ultimately, it is the citizens of the city who indirectly run their affairs, and it's gone bankrupt. There are at least 13 to 14 other similar cities and counties facing bankruptcy. The health service is near collapse because the queues for treatment, even for a scan, can be up to 2 years. Doctors are on strike. Consultants, senior doctors are on threatening to go on strike. Nurses have been on strike. Teachers, because living standards have been squeezed. Two things which have really squeezed living standards. One is the rocketing energy price. I'll give you a small example. My winter expense for my 4-bedroom is 320. Over the winter, I was paying £550 per month. And that's a bit of a jump, 400%. That's hurt a lot of people. And secondly, food inflation until last year was 20%. Bear in mind that the poor spend the majority of their money on food and then accommodation. So for them, it is very stressful. And these people are relatively, at the margins. For them, small amounts of money make the difference. And many people are unable to eat properly. 1 in 10 has been surveyed to say they're taken to shoplifting. Police are not even bothering to respond to calls if you catch a shoplifter, only if they engage in violence. So this is just the beginning of how bad things are, because the economic situation will not improve anytime soon. As I said, the debt is very high. The cost of servicing that debt is very high. How do you do it except taking away more? And taxes will rise because now that bond yields are going up because of what's happening in the United States worldwide, this is more pressure on the United Kingdom. And it doesn't matter who's in power. I can tell you what will happen when Labour is in power, which is always the same thing. They come in with all these bold plans, and within 3 months, they do a U-turn. And the Treasury imposes financial probity, which they hate. Even Lord Carlton, the great economist of the 60s, used to say, why didn't the Germans bomb the Treasury? The Treasury orthodoxy always wins. And after Labour comes, after a little while, Treasury orthodoxy, which basically means financial discipline, increased taxes, more cuts, will dominate. So this is a hole from which they cannot dig themselves out. But we in India are determined to help them with the free trade treaties, to give them breathing space. This is our Gandhian contribution to the welfare of the world.
Hopefully, we're not giving a free trade agreement to Canada, but yes, we might give one to the UK. Tell us, Dr. Sen, you have written and said in the recent past that the long-term hope for the UK, or the long-term bet of the UK, is India. Explain to us what you mean by that.
You see, for all of these countries, the great white hope China is now a problem. They remain very dependent on China. Let's not forget, even as we speak, Germany, Europe, UK, US, very hard to get out of this completely. Because, there's been huge relocation of activity, manufacturing, across the board. You cannot restore all this quickly. So that is not going to happen. But India is a card they're going to play, because India's economy is going to grow. It will be 5 trillion by 2030, definitely, if not more. So it's an obvious country to engage with. And in the case of the United Kingdom, having left Europe without making an adequate economic assessment of the cost. Great man Boris Johnson simply wrote a populist wave without proper analysis or preparation. Really, it was just a populist measure to get into power. And the costs are being paid now. Because now it's very difficult to export to Europe because of all the kind of requirements. There is no free trade, documentation. Forget about just the tariff. This has imposed huge costs on export. This is the problem. If you have free trade with India, you will attract inward or people who want to use Britain as a platform. Let me assure you, this inward investment will also come from China. And then what will India do? Chinese firms manufacture goods which will say made in England. What are you going to do? Already thousands of Indians are working for Chinese firms in the United States, helping them with their AI and all the means of warfare against India. some of the most talented Indians we managed to kick out of places like Tamil Nadu, out there working for Chinese-owned firms, creating means of warfare against India. So this is where we are at. Now, the UK will also hope to collaborate with Indian companies because India companies are very important. Tata is the biggest employer in the manufacturing sector between motoring and steel, the biggest single, and they've made a success of it with apparently very good management. They managed to attract our great vaccine maker. They've dangled all sorts of things to him, and he's going to now open business here. They are hoping to attract Indian businesses to come to you. Many Indians want a toehold here. They want to keep their children and their families in England, a large part. Many of them see themselves as dual citizens in practice, and they can have the OIC card. And many of the families with their children in British schools want to be here. And all said and done, most Indians come to the southeast of England, London. Provided you have the money, London is a fabulous place to live in. And these people are not short of money. So, they will really leverage the India connection to not just gain respite, but to lead their growth. This does not suit India because there are many areas in which we need kind of infant industry production. Many of our newcomers who have just joined the race will find it hard going in the early years if foreign companies are able to compete with them on a level playing field, which India on the whole has not offered even now. Despite all our WTO commitments, we have protected many of our key sectors. Look at motor vehicle parts. They are big because we protected them. And there are many other areas, and I hope a very sustained sector by sector analysis is being undertaken to judge how they will fare, because this competition in the UK will be with the world, because the world will come to UK to compete. UK will have a surge of investment. And of course, the irony will be many talented Indians will come from India to run these companies and become their employees. So this is a poison chalice, which we should examine very, very carefully.
Like I said, always very, 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 very enlightening and very interesting to talk to you about a whole range of issues. Thanks very much for your time. We will leave it at that. Thank you very much for explaining a whole host of issues, both security wise and economic, to us today about India and the West. Thanks very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me.